You think how hard it feels matters, that the struggle itself means something, that the effort should count for something. It doesn't. Not to the outcome, not to the result, not to the world outside your head. Because the world doesn't measure effort. It measures what gets done, what gets finished, what actually moves. And that's the part most people resist, because it feels unfair, it feels cold, it feels like everything you're going through is being ignored. And it is. Your struggle is real, your effort is real, the resistance you feel is real. But none of that guarantees an outcome. You can try harder than everyone around you and still get nothing. Because trying is not the same as producing. Feeling resistance is not the same as moving forward. This is where most people get trapped. They start measuring themselves by effort. How hard did I push? How much did I endure? How much did this cost me? And when those numbers are high, they expect results to follow. But that's not how it works. The system doesn't reward effort. It rewards effectiveness. It rewards execution. It rewards completion. It rewards what actually happens. And that creates a disconnect. Because internally, you feel like you're doing everything right. You're pushing, you're trying, you're showing up. But externally, nothing changes. And that's when frustration builds, because it feels like your effort is invisible. Because it is. Until it produces something. That's the rule. Effort only becomes visible when it turns into a result. Not before, not during, only after. That's why people don't respond to your struggle. They respond to your output. They respond to what you deliver. They respond to what changes. And once you accept that, something shifts. You stop expecting recognition for effort. You stop waiting for validation during the process. You stop caring how hard it feels, because you realize that feeling has nothing to do with the outcome. And that's where discipline actually begins. Not when it feels good, not when it feels fair, but when you act anyway without needing the feeling to justify it. Because the result is the only thing that translates. If this message resonates with you, like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who are done waiting. The problem isn't that it feels hard. The problem is that you're listening to how it feels and using that as your signal, as your guide, as your decision point. If it feels too heavy, slow down. If it feels overwhelming, step back. If it feels uncomfortable, stop. That's how most people operate. And that's why most people stall. Because feelings are not designed to measure progress. They're designed to protect you from discomfort, from uncertainty, from effort itself. So the moment something requires more from you, your system pushes back. Not because it's wrong, because it's unfamiliar. That resistance you feel, that heaviness, that friction, that internal weight, it's not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you've reached a threshold, a point where most people turn around and call it too much. But nothing changes on the side of comfort. Nothing expands where everything feels easy. Growth only exists past that point. And that's why the feeling is misleading, because it makes the wrong option feel right. It makes stopping feel justified. It makes slowing down feel smart, even when it's costing you progress. So people build a habit of negotiating with their own discomfort. They adjust based on feeling. They move based on ease. They decide based on resistance. And over time, that becomes their default. A system that avoids pressure, avoids difficulty, avoids anything that doesn't feel right. And that system guarantees one thing: you stay where you are. Because every time it gets hard, you step away. Every time it stretches you, you pull back. So nothing ever fully forms, nothing fully develops, nothing reaches completion. And without completion, there is no result. That's why this shift matters. You have to separate what you feel from what you do. Because if your actions are controlled by feeling, your progress will always be limited. But if your actions are controlled by direction, feeling becomes irrelevant. It can be heavy. It can be uncomfortable. It can feel wrong. And you still move. Not because it feels right, but because it leads somewhere. That's the shift most people never make. They stay loyal to how it feels, instead of committing to where it goes. And that's why effort stays high, but results stay low. Because feeling was never the metric. Direction was. Nobody cares how hard it feels. And more importantly, it doesn't change anything. Not your outcome, not your position, not your direction. You can struggle through it, or you can complain through it. But the requirement stays the same. The work still has to be done. The standard doesn't move. The process doesn't adjust for you. And the result doesn't care how you felt getting there. That's the part most people never accept. They believe the difficulty should mean something, that the weight of it should be acknowledged, that the effort alone should count. But effort without completion is invisible. It leaves no trace. You can start 10 times, push hard each time, feel everything fully, and still end up with nothing, because nothing was finished. That's why this has to change. Not your effort, not your intensity, your relationship with the process. You don't stop when it feels heavy. You don't slow down when it feels wrong. You don't question it because it's uncomfortable. You continue. Not emotionally, not reactively, structurally. You follow through because it leads somewhere, not because it feels good doing it. And once that shift happens, something else changes. The weight doesn't disappear. The discomfort doesn't go away. But it stops controlling you. You stop negotiating. You stop adjusting. You stop stepping back every time it gets hard. And that's where separation begins. Because while most people are still reacting, still hesitating, still listening to how it feels, you're still moving. Even when it's heavy, even when it's quiet, even when it doesn't feel like anything is happening. That consistency, that continuation, that's what builds results. Not bursts of effort, not emotional spikes, not moments of intensity, but sustained direction, without interruption. And over time, that becomes the difference. Not talent, not motivation, not how hard it felt, but who kept going when it did. So stop measuring the weight of it. Stop analyzing how it feels. Stop using discomfort as a signal. And start finishing what you begin. Because at the end of it, nobody sees how hard it felt. They only see what was built. If this shifted how you see effort, subscribe. There's more coming that most people won't sit through. But if you do, you won't stay where you are.
Most people think discipline
Is about intensity, about pushing harder, about forcing effort when you don't feel like it. But that's not what it really is. Discipline is not about force. It's about continuation. It's the ability to keep moving without needing a reason. Because the truth is, most people only act when they feel something. Motivation, excitement, urgency. And when that disappears, they disappear with it. That's the cycle. Action tied to emotion. Emotion fades, action stops. Then everything resets. Over and over again. Never building, never stabilizing. So what people call lack of discipline is really dependence. Dependence on feeling ready. Dependence on wanting to do it. Dependence on conditions being right. But discipline removes that. It cuts emotion out of the equation. It replaces "I feel like it" with "I do it anyway." And that shift changes everything. Because now, your actions don't stop when your mood changes. They continue, even when it's boring, even when it's repetitive, even when there's no visible progress. And that's the part most people can't handle. Not the difficulty, the absence of reward. The silence. No feedback, no validation, no sign that it's working. Just the same action, again and again. That's where people stop. Not because it's too hard, because it feels pointless, because there's no evidence, no immediate return, no clear result, just time passing. And that's exactly where discipline begins. Not when it's clear, not when it's rewarding, but when it's empty, when there's nothing pulling you forward, and nothing pushing you either, just the choice to continue. That's the real test. Can you keep going? Without proof? Without momentum? Without feeling anything at all? Because if you can, everything changes. But most people can't. They wait. They hesitate. They look for signs. And in that waiting, they lose time, while someone else just continues, quietly, without needing confirmation. And that's where the separation starts.
The real difficulty is not starting.
Starting is easy. It gives you something to feel, momentum, direction, a sense that something is finally changing. And that feeling carries you for a while. But it never lasts, because it was never meant to last. It was built on emotion, and emotion is unstable. It rises, it falls, and when it falls, your actions fall with it. That's where everything changes, not in the beginning, but right after it. Because what comes next is repetition. The same actions, the same structure, the same routine, with no visible difference, no feedback, no reward, no signal that anything is working, just time passing and effort repeating. And that's the moment most people break, not because it's too hard, but because it feels empty. Nothing is happening fast enough. Nothing is changing in a way they can see. So the mind starts looking for answers. Is this working? Should I change something? Am I wasting time? And those questions don't come from logic. They come from discomfort. Discomfort with silence, discomfort with repetition, discomfort with not knowing. Because people are used to signals, they're used to feedback, they're used to feeling progress. And when those signals disappear, they assume something is wrong. So they change direction, they adjust, they restart. They look for something that feels more effective, something that gives them that same beginning energy again, that same feeling of movement, that same illusion of progress. But every time they do that, they reset everything. They go back to the beginning. They never stay long enough to reach the part where it actually compounds, where effort starts stacking. Because compounding doesn't happen in the beginning. It happens after repetition, after consistency, after time. And time requires continuation, not intensity, not bursts of effort. Continuation. The ability to keep going when nothing is confirming you. That's what most people can't do. They can start, but they can't stay. They leave too early. They exit the process right before it starts working. And because of that, they stay stuck in beginnings, forever starting, never continuing. But the ones who stay, even when it feels empty, even when it feels pointless, they move forward, not because they saw something others didn't, but because they didn't leave. And that's where the separation actually happens, not at the start, but in the continuation. If this message resonates with you, like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who are done waiting. Most people don't fail because they chose the wrong path. They fail because they don't stay on any path long enough. They move, they act, they start, but they don't remain. There's always a point where the process loses its meaning, where it stops feeling important, where the urgency disappears. At the beginning, everything feels intentional. Every action feels like progress. Every step feels connected to an outcome. But over time, that connection fades. The actions stay the same. The effort stays the same. But the feeling behind it disappears. And once the feeling is gone, most people begin to detach. They stop taking it seriously. Not all at once, but gradually. They hesitate more. They delay small things. They become less precise, less consistent. And none of it feels like failure. It feels small, almost unnoticeable, like nothing significant has changed. But that's how it happens. Not through collapse, through drift. Small breaks in focus, small breaks in execution, small moments where they choose not to act. And those small moments start to stack. They interrupt continuity. They weaken momentum. They slow everything down. Because discipline is not tested in big moments. It's tested in the small ones. The moments where nothing is forcing you. No pressure, no urgency, no consequence if you don't act. Those are the moments that define everything. Because that's where most people relax. That's where they let standards drop. That's where they allow inconsistency to enter. And once inconsistency enters, it spreads. It affects everything. One missed action becomes two. Two become a pattern. And that pattern becomes your default. Not because you decided it, but because you allowed it. This is how discipline breaks down. Not through resistance, but through permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to delay. Permission to not take something seriously. And once that permission exists, it's used again, and again, until there is no structure left. That's why continuation is difficult, because it requires constant awareness. You have to notice the small drops in standard, the slight hesitation, the subtle shift in effort, and correct it immediately. Not later, not when it becomes a problem, because by then, it's already a pattern, already part of how you operate. The people who continue don't allow that to happen. They don't negotiate with those small moments. They don't wait to feel aligned. They don't wait to feel ready. They act the same, regardless of how it feels. That's what keeps continuity intact. That's what protects momentum. That's what allows progress to build. Because once continuity is broken, everything becomes harder. You have to rebuild rhythm, rebuild focus, rebuild the habit of acting. And that takes more effort than just continuing would have. Every time. So the discipline to continue is really the discipline to not allow small breaks, not allow small drops, not allow small exits, because those small moments are never small. They're where everything shifts. And the ones who understand that don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure. They move the same way, every day. Not perfectly, but consistently. And over time, that consistency separates them. Not in a dramatic way, but in a permanent one. What most people are waiting for never actually comes. That moment where everything feels aligned, where the effort feels natural, where the process feels clear. They think at some point it will all make sense, that the repetition will feel justified, that the discipline will feel easier. But it doesn't. It stays the same. Quiet, repetitive, unremarkable. And that's the part no one prepares for. Not the difficulty, but the normality of it. The days where nothing stands out. Nothing feels important. Nothing feels like progress. Those days are not interruptions. They are the process. They are where everything is built. Because progress doesn't come from intensity. It comes from accumulation. Small actions, repeated, over time. And most of those actions feel insignificant when you're doing them. They don't feel like they matter. So people start to underestimate them. They treat them like they're optional, like missing one doesn't change anything. But it does, because the system depends on continuity, not effort. One break becomes two. Two becomes inconsistency. And inconsistency breaks accumulation. That's why most people never see results, not because they didn't try, but because they didn't stay long enough for it to build. They interrupt the process. They step out too early. They leave before anything compounds. And when they look back, it feels like nothing worked. But nothing had time to work. The ones who move forward are not doing something extraordinary. They're doing something very simple. They continue, even when it's quiet, even when it feels pointless, even when there's no confirmation. They don't look for signals. They don't wait for reassurance. They don't need to feel progress to keep going. They understand something most people ignore, that the process doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show you when it starts working. It just builds, silently, until one day the result appears. And by that point, it looks sudden, it looks fast, but it wasn't. It was slow. It was consistent. It was built in all the moments where nothing seemed to be happening. So if you keep leaving early, you'll never see it. You'll always stop right before it shows, and if you keep restarting, you'll stay in the same place, just with different beginnings. So the question is not if it's working. The question is, are you staying long enough to find out? Because if you are, it will happen. Not immediately, not visibly, but eventually. And when it does, it won't feel like luck. It will feel earned. Because you didn't leave. And most people will never reach that point. Not because they couldn't, but because they stopped. So don't make it complicated. Don't overanalyze it. Don't keep searching for something better. Stay. Continue. Repeat. And if you understand that, you're already ahead of most people. If this made sense to you, subscribe, because most people won't hear this enough to actually follow it. And if you're still here, you already know what you need to do. Just don't leave early this time.
You think they move faster because they work harder.
They don't. They just stopped depending on effort alone. They stopped rebuilding everything with their hands. They stopped solving the same problem from the beginning. They stopped confusing motion with progress. That is the difference you keep missing. From the outside, it looks like speed, it looks like momentum, it looks like talent. But most of the time, it is structure. It is placement. It is advantage built before the work even starts. You are looking at the visible part, the action, the output, the result. You are not looking at what is underneath it, the position, the system, the leverage. So you compare your strain to their result, and it feels unfair because you are using force, and they are getting distance. But force and distance are not the same thing. You can strain for hours and barely move. Someone else can make one correct move and change the entire outcome. That is not luck. That is not magic. That is not cheating. That is what happens when effort is attached to something that multiplies it. Every action they take connects to something. A network, a reputation, a skill stack, a process, a position they built earlier. So when they move, they are not moving alone. Their past work is moving with them. That is why it looks easier, because it is. Not easier because they are soft. Easier because they stopped relying on brute force. You are still carrying the full weight yourself, every time. You restart the machine by hand. You rebuild momentum from zero. You spend energy creating what should already exist. And that keeps you tired, not just physically, strategically, because exhaustion hides patterns. When you are always pushing, you do not step back. When you do not step back, you do not see the design. So you keep doing more hours, more pressure, more output. But more is useless when nothing compounds. That is the part that separates people, not effort. Compounding effort. The ability to make one action support the next. The ability to build something once and benefit from it again. The ability to stop trading time for every result. The people moving faster are not always stronger than you. They are often less wasteful than you. They are not burning energy everywhere. They are not restarting every morning. They are not solving solved problems. They build a base, then they move from it. They build a tool, then they use it again. They build trust, then opportunities come to them faster. They build skill, then fewer mistakes slow them down. That is why their effort travels farther, because it has something to travel through. Yours keeps hitting the ground and dying there. This is why hard workers often feel bitter. They know they are trying, they know they are sacrificing, they know they are carrying weight, but they do not understand why someone else is still advancing faster. And without understanding leverage, they create the wrong story. They say the world is unfair. They say other people got lucky. They say results are fake. They say shortcuts are dishonest. No, some people just learned how not to live by force alone. Once you understand that, your entire view changes. You stop admiring visible struggle. You stop worshipping exhaustion. You stop measuring value by how drained you feel at the end. You start asking better questions. What keeps working after I stop? What carries weight for me? What removes friction instead of proving how much I can endure? That is where speed actually begins. Not in effort, in structure. Not in pressure, in leverage. Not in doing more with your hands, in building something that keeps moving when your hands are off it.
Most people don't fall behind because they're lazy.
They fall behind because they're positioned wrong. They start from zero every single time. They wake up, push, work, try, and at the end of the day, nothing carries forward. Nothing builds, nothing compounds, nothing stays. So tomorrow feels exactly the same. Not because they failed, but because nothing stacked. This is the invisible trap. You think you're progressing, but you're just repeating effort without accumulation. And repetition without accumulation is just controlled stagnation. It feels productive, but it leads nowhere, because nothing is being built beneath the action. Look closely at how most people operate. They complete tasks, but they don't create systems. They solve problems, but they don't eliminate them. They work hard, but they don't reduce future effort. So everything costs them again. Time, energy, focus. Every single day. The ones moving faster stopped paying full price. Not because they cheat, but because they design. They build once, then reuse. They learn once, then apply across everything. They struggle once, then remove the need to struggle the same way again. That is accumulation. That is compounding. That is how effort starts stretching. You don't need more effort. You need effort that stays. Effort that connects. Effort that carries forward. Right now, you are spending everything you produce and wondering why nothing grows. It's the same pattern as money. If everything you earn is used immediately, you never build anything. Effort works the same way. If every action disappears after it's done, you stay in survival mode, working, resetting, working again, with no real expansion. But the moment something starts staying, everything changes. A system removes a repeated task. A skill reduces mistakes. A connection opens doors faster. A process saves time. Now, effort is no longer isolated. It starts stacking. It starts multiplying. That's when speed appears. Not because you're rushing, but because less is being wasted. Less restarting. Less rebuilding. Less unnecessary friction. So every step you take actually moves you forward. This is where most people break, because this requires a different mindset. Not, how do I do more? But, how do I make this last? How do I build something from this? How do I reduce the cost next time? That is not how most people think, which is why most people stay stuck. They chase effort instead of building leverage. They chase movement instead of direction. And direction is what actually determines distance. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every action becomes a question. Does this disappear, or does this stay? That question changes everything.
If this message resonates with you,
Like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who want control over their focus, not constant noise. Once you understand this, you start seeing why most people stay stuck. Not because they lack effort, but because they keep placing effort in the wrong place. They invest into things that don't return, time that disappears, energy that resets, actions that don't carry forward. And the worst part? It feels like progress because they're busy, because they're moving, because they're trying. But none of it builds. So the outcome never changes. Only the exhaustion does. Look at the pattern. You take action. You get a small result. Then it fades. You repeat the process, and it fades again. There is no accumulation, no stacking, no structure holding anything in place. So everything depends on you showing up again. Every result requires fresh effort, which means the moment you slow down, everything slows down with you. That's not progress. That's dependency. You've built a system where nothing survives without you, and that keeps you trapped. The people moving ahead, they're not tied to that loop anymore. They build things that continue, even when they're not actively pushing. A process keeps running. A skill keeps reducing friction. A network keeps opening access. A reputation keeps creating opportunities. Everything they built keeps working. So they don't just move when they act. They move even when they pause. That is leverage. And once leverage enters the equation, effort changes completely. It's no longer about how hard you push. It's about where that push lands. A small action in the right place can outperform massive effort in the wrong one. That's why some people look like they're barely trying, but still advancing faster than everyone around them. They are not wasting movement. They are placing it precisely. Every action connects to something. Every step reinforces the next. You can't compete with that using effort alone, because effort without leverage has limits. You get tired. You burn out. You slow down. But leverage doesn't get tired. Leverage keeps working. That's the shift you need to make. Not more effort, better placement. Start looking at everything you do through that lens. Does this build something? Does this reduce future cost? Does this carry forward? If it doesn't, you're just spending energy. And spending energy without building anything is how people stay stuck for years. You don't need to do more. You need to stop wasting what you already do. Because once your effort starts stacking, speed is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that happens. And that's when everything separates. There's a point where effort stops being the problem, and placement becomes everything. Because once you see how leverage works, you realize something uncomfortable. Most of what you've been doing was never meant to scale. It was only meant to survive the moment. Tasks that expire, effort that disappears, energy that solves today but leaves tomorrow untouched. That's why it feels like you're always behind. Not because you're slow, but because nothing you do is carrying forward. So every day starts heavy. Every task feels manual. Every result feels temporary. And over time, that drains you. Not just physically, mentally, strategically. Because deep down, you start realizing something isn't adding up. You're doing enough. Sometimes more than enough. But the outcome isn't reflecting it. And that creates friction, doubt, frustration. Not because you're incapable, but because you're misaligned. Effort is being applied, just not in places that return. And effort without return always feels like loss. So people respond the wrong way. They try to push harder, add more hours, increase pressure. But pressure on the wrong structure doesn't create progress. It just creates strain. And strain eventually breaks you. This is where awareness becomes critical, because once you recognize the pattern, you stop reacting emotionally and start adjusting structurally. You begin pulling back from constant motion, not to slow down, but to see clearly. Where is your effort going? What is it producing? And more importantly, what is it leaving behind? Because if nothing remains, nothing grows. That's the rule. Not effort, not motivation, not intensity, accumulation. If something doesn't accumulate, it cannot scale. And if it cannot scale, it will always depend on you, your time, your energy, your presence. That is the ceiling most people never break, because they never shift out of that dependency. They build lives that require constant input, instead of systems that reduce it. And once that pattern locks in, years pass. Effort stays high. Results stay limited. Not because of effort, but because of structure. That's the correction. Not doing more, but building differently. Because once structure changes, everything else follows. Effort becomes lighter. Movement becomes cleaner. Progress becomes visible. Not instantly, but consistently. And consistency built on the right structure is what actually moves you forward.
At some point,
You stop asking why things feel hard. And you start asking a different question. Why does this keep costing me so much? Because that's the real signal, not difficulty, cost. Time, energy, focus. What you have to give, just to move forward. And if the cost stays high forever, you never actually get ahead. You just survive longer. That's what most people build without realizing it. A system of survival, not a system of growth. Everything they do works, but only in the moment. Nothing reduces the next step. Nothing carries forward. So progress feels temporary, because it is. But once you see this clearly, you can't go back to operating the same way. You stop respecting effort by itself. You stop admiring how hard something feels. You stop measuring your days by exhaustion, and you start measuring something else. What stayed? What improved? What became easier because of what I did? That shift is everything, because now you're not just acting, you're building. And building changes the timeline. What used to take hours starts taking minutes. What used to drain you barely touches you, because the weight is no longer sitting on you. It's sitting inside the structure you created. That's when progress stops feeling forced, not because you're doing less, but because less is being wasted. And when less is wasted, more is kept, more stacks, more compounds. That's where separation happens, quietly, over time. Not in one big moment, but in what continues after the moment is over. So if you've been feeling stuck, if you've been pushing and not seeing it reflect, stop asking how to push harder. Ask what you're building. Ask what stays. Ask what reduces the cost next time. Because once your effort starts staying, everything changes. Speed changes. Clarity changes. Direction changes. And the gap you thought was about effort reveals itself. It was always about structure. If this shifted your perspective, pay attention to what you're building next, because that's what determines everything that follows. And if you're ready to move differently, stay with this. There's more coming.
You were given a rule early.
Work hard. That was enough. No explanation, no nuance, no conditions. Just effort. And you followed it. You showed up when it was inconvenient. You stayed when others left. You kept going when it got uncomfortable. You built your identity around it. The one who works harder than everyone else. And for a while, it worked. Results came. Progress felt measurable. Effort translated into movement. That reinforced the belief. Hard work equals success. So you trusted it, not as advice, as truth. But something started to change. Not suddenly, gradually, quietly. The same effort started producing less. The same time returned less. The same energy moved you less. You noticed it, but you didn't question the rule. You questioned yourself. Maybe you're not disciplined enough. Maybe you need more intensity. Maybe you need to sacrifice more. So you increased effort. You worked longer. You cut distractions. You removed rest. You pushed harder than before. Because that's what you were taught to do. When results drop, work harder. But nothing changed. Not in the way it used to. You were still moving, but not advancing. Still working, but not progressing. Still pushing, but not gaining ground. And that creates tension. Because now, effort and outcome are disconnected. You're doing more, but receiving less. That contradiction starts to break something, not your routine, your belief. Because if hard work guarantees results, and you're working hard, then the only explanation left is that you're the problem. So you push even harder, not out of clarity, out of pressure, out of fear. You tighten everything, your time, your focus, your environment. You try to eliminate every weakness because you believe effort will fix it. But effort doesn't fix direction. It amplifies it. If the direction is right, effort accelerates progress. If the direction is wrong, effort accelerates stagnation. And that's the part no one tells you. You can push relentlessly and still go nowhere. You can stay disciplined and still stay stuck. Because hard work doesn't guarantee progress. It only guarantees output. And output is not the same as movement. You weren't failing because you lacked effort. You were failing because effort was never the full answer, and you didn't know when it stopped working. There's a point where effort stops being the solution and starts becoming the problem. Not because effort is wrong, because it's limited. Hard work only works when the structure around it supports it, when direction is correct, when positioning makes sense, when effort is applied to something that can actually grow. Remove those, and effort loses power. But you don't see that. You only see one variable: work harder. So you keep applying pressure to something that has already reached its ceiling. And ceilings don't break from effort, they hold. That's why your results stall, not because you slowed down, because you stayed the same. Same actions, same approach, same system, just more force. And force doesn't create expansion, it creates resistance. Think about it. If you repeat the same process at a higher intensity, you don't get a new outcome. You get a faster version of the same outcome. That's the trap. You believe effort creates change. But effort only amplifies what already exists. If the system is flawed, effort scales the flaw. And you don't notice it at first because you're moving, you're active, you're doing something. But movement isn't progress. Progress requires adjustment. It requires awareness. It requires stepping back and questioning what you're doing. That's the part you avoid, because stopping feels like weakness. Slowing down feels like losing. So you don't adjust. You don't rethink. You don't reposition. You just push. Harder. Longer. Heavier. And that creates a false sense of control. As long as you're working, you feel like you're doing something right. But effort without awareness is just repetition. And repetition without adjustment locks you in place. That's why hard work stops working. Not because effort fails, because you never change what effort is applied to. You stay in the same lane, the same method, the same thinking. And over time, that lane narrows, that method weakens, that thinking limits you. But you don't see the limitation. You only see the effort. So you keep pushing, even when the path is wrong, even when the system is capped, even when the return is shrinking. Because you were never taught when to stop pushing and start changing direction. If you're done living in distraction, like and subscribe. This channel exists to help you protect your attention and build something real. At first, it just feels slow. You notice the results aren't the same, but you tell yourself to stay consistent. So you keep going. You push through the resistance. You ignore the signals. You trust the process, because that's what you've been told. Stay disciplined. Stay focused. Stay committed. But something deeper starts to shift. Not in your routine, in your state. The effort starts to feel heavier, not physically, mentally. What used to feel controlled now feels forced. You still show up, but it's different. There's tension, there's friction, there's weight behind every action. And you don't understand why. Because from the outside, nothing has changed. You're still working, still disciplined, still consistent. But internally, something is breaking. Because effort without progress creates doubt. Not immediately, gradually. You start questioning yourself. Am I doing this wrong? Am I not good enough? Am I missing something? And those questions don't stay quiet. They build. They repeat. They start influencing how you move. Now every action carries pressure. Every decision feels heavier. Every step feels uncertain. You hesitate more. You second-guess more. You overthink things that used to be automatic. Because the system you trusted is no longer giving you feedback. And without feedback, effort becomes draining. You're putting in energy with no clear return. That's where burnout begins. Not from working too much, from working without progress. Because effort without movement feels like being stuck. And being stuck destroys momentum. You start slowing down. Not because you want to, because your system is resisting. Your focus weakens. Your consistency slips. Your energy drops. And now it gets worse. Because the moment you slow down, you feel like you're failing. So you try to compensate. You push harder again. You force more effort. You try to regain control. But the result stays the same. Now you're trapped. Working harder doesn't fix it. Slowing down feels like failure. So you sit in between, pushing, but going nowhere. And over time, that changes how you see yourself. You start associating effort with frustration, discipline with pressure, work with stagnation. That's dangerous, because now, the very thing that used to build you starts breaking you. Not because effort is wrong, because it's being misused. And until you see that, you'll keep repeating it, pushing harder and getting nowhere. At some point, you feel it. Something isn't right. The effort is there, the discipline is there, but the results aren't. That's the moment most people should stop and think, step back, reevaluate. But you don't. Because stopping feels wrong. It feels like weakness. It feels like quitting. So you keep going. Not because it's working, because it's familiar. You've tied your identity to effort, to discipline, to consistency. So if you stop, you feel like you're losing that identity. You feel like you're becoming something else, something weaker. So you protect it, even when it's no longer helping you. That's the loop. You mistake persistence for progress. You believe that continuing is always the right move, that pushing through is always the answer. But it's not. There's a difference between continuing forward and refusing to change direction. And most people never learn it. Because the system rewards effort. It praises hard work. It glorifies grind. So you double down on it. Even when it stops making sense. You ignore signals. You dismiss friction. You push through resistance without asking why it's there. Because questioning the path feels more uncomfortable than continuing it. Changing direction means admitting something, that what you've been doing might not be right. And that's difficult, because it forces you to confront time, energy, effort already spent. You don't want to feel like it was wasted, so you keep investing into it, even when the return is gone. That's how people stay stuck. Not because they don't work, because they don't adjust. They stay locked into the same actions, the same structure, the same thinking, just with more force. And force doesn't create change. Awareness does. But awareness requires something you avoid. stillness, space to think, space to question, space to step back. And you don't give yourself that, because you're always moving, always doing, always pushing. So the pattern repeats. Effort, stagnation, more effort, and no change. Not because you can't break it, because you won't stop long enough to see it. The answer was never to stop working. It was to stop working blindly. Effort isn't the problem. Misplaced effort is. You were taught to push, but never taught when to pause. Never taught when to question. Never taught when to change. So you kept applying force without direction. And direction is what creates progress, not effort alone. The moment you stop and actually look, everything changes. You start seeing patterns, what's working, what isn't, where you're wasting energy. You start removing what doesn't matter. You start refining what does. That's where real progress begins. Not when you do more, when you do better, when your effort becomes precise, when your actions align with outcomes, when movement finally becomes progress. Now the same effort starts producing again, not because you increased it, because you directed it. That's the shift, from force to awareness, from pushing harder to moving smarter. That's what replaces blind hard work. And once you see it, you can't go back, because now you understand hard work was never enough. It just felt like it was. And that's why it stopped working. Like the video, subscribe, and continue with intention. You think the competition is strong, disciplined, focused, consistent. But that's not what actually exists. Most of your competition is inconsistent, not incapable, unstable. They start with energy, with intention, with plans, but they don't sustain it. They move in bursts, then disappear. They rely on motivation, on feeling ready, on being in the mood. And when that fades, so does their effort. So does their consistency. This creates gaps, not visible at first, but real. Days they don't show up, decisions they delay, actions they avoid. And those gaps are where separation begins, not through intensity, through absence, through inconsistency, through stopping. Most people are not losing because others are better. They're losing because others are still there, still showing up, while they pause, while they hesitate, while they wait for the right moment. There is no right moment, only repeated action, over time. And most people don't repeat long enough. They want variation, they want novelty, they switch strategies, change direction, restart too early, because repetition feels boring, it feels slow, it feels like nothing is happening. So they leave the process before it has time to build, before it has time to separate them. And that's why the competition looks strong from a distance, because you're only seeing the moments they show up, not the ones they don't. You see effort, but not inconsistency. You see action, but not the breaks between it, the pauses, the resets, the hesitation. And those breaks matter, because every time someone stops, they lose position, not all at once, but gradually, quietly, while someone else, who is less intense, but more consistent, keeps moving, keeps building, keeps stacking, and over time, that person passes them, not because they're better, because they didn't stop. That's the reality. The competition isn't overwhelming, it's inconsistent, it's unstable, it's unreliable, and most of it eliminates itself, without you needing to do anything extra, because showing up alone already puts you ahead of most people. Not eventually, immediately, from the moment they stop and you don't.
If this message resonates with you,
Like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who want control over their focus, not constant noise. The mistake is overestimating everyone else. You assume they're consistent, that they're focused every day, that they're doing more than you. But most people aren't operating like that. They're inconsistent in ways you don't see, because inconsistency isn't visible. You don't see the skipped days, the delayed actions, the moments they chose comfort instead. You only see output, the highlight, the visible effort. And that distorts your perception. It makes it look like everyone is moving, when most are stopping repeatedly. That's why it feels crowded, like you're behind, like you're competing with constant movement. But you're not. You're competing with inconsistency, with interruption. And interruption kills momentum. Every time someone stops, they reset their position. They lose timing. They lose rhythm. They lose accumulated progress. And starting again is never the same as continuing. It costs more energy, more time, more effort to rebuild what was lost. And most people do this repeatedly, without realizing it. They start, they build a little, then they stop, then restart, then stop again, always interrupting the process. So even if they have ability, they never sustain progress. They never let it compound. And that's why consistency is so powerful, because it removes interruption. It preserves momentum. You don't need to be extreme. You don't need to be intense every day. You need to not stop. That's the edge. Not doing more. Not doing something different. Just continuing when others pause. That's where separation builds. Quietly. Without attention. Without recognition. Because nothing looks different at first. You're still doing the same work. In the same way. But internally, your position is changing. You're moving ahead, while others reset behind you. And over time, those resets create distance. Not dramatic at first, but enough. Enough to separate outcomes. Enough to create advantage. Because consistency compounds, while inconsistency cancels itself. It erases its own progress. So the more people rely on bursts, the more they stay in place, even if they feel like they're trying. And the ones who don't stop, even if they move slower, become impossible to catch. Because they never reset, they never lose position, they never give ground back. That's the truth. The competition isn't consistent, it only looks that way. And once you understand that, you stop worrying about them and focus on not becoming them.
by the time it becomes obvious,
It's already too late to catch up. Not because they accelerated, because you stopped. That's how the gap really forms. Not through massive effort differences, through interruption. Every pause costs you position. Every reset puts you behind. Not instantly, but over time. quietly, until the distance is real. And when you finally notice it, it feels like everyone passed you, like they're ahead. But they didn't jump forward. You stepped out. You broke continuity, while someone else just kept going. Same pace, same actions. Nothing dramatic, nothing extreme, just uninterrupted movement. And that's enough. Enough to separate outcomes, enough to dominate over time. Because consistency compounds. It builds on itself. It creates momentum. And momentum makes everything easier. Less hesitation, less friction, more clarity. While inconsistency does the opposite. It breaks flow. It increases resistance. It forces you to restart mentally, over and over, never stabilizing. So the real advantage isn't effort, it's continuity. It's not stopping. Not when it's boring, not when it's slow, not when it feels pointless, because that's when most people leave. That's when the competition disappears. That's when the field clears. Not through force, through absence, through people removing themselves. And if you stay, if you continue, if you don't break the pattern, you don't need to outwork everyone. You outlast them. And over time, that's enough. If you see it, like the video and subscribe for more.